For some reason, camera is focused on the back of the room. So we'll see if I can get it. You follow me. If not, I'll be climbing on a chair. Come on. No. Let's see. New channel.
I think now went to the other side.
Oh my God. There we go. Let's see. Maybe. Let's do it. Oh, for the love of God. Maybe it's gonna work. All right, so today is the really fun part because we can watch ads. This is the part of marketing that everybody thinks of as being marketing, is the advertising and promotion part of marketing. It's the part that is highly entertaining because you all have hopefully found, and I have not looked at your ads before today, so I will have a fresh perspective. I deliberately did that so that I can look at the ad and decide whether or not for myself while we're all watching the ad, whether I agree with your ad selection of whether or not it's a great ad. So we're gonna look at whether or not the ad is great, why you guys think it's great, why either I think it's great or it's not great. And then we're gonna talk about the ethics of the ads. And so let's play the first ad. Who did the first one was the WWE 2K20 Legends, is that right?
Yes.
So why did you guys think that was a great commercial?
Yeah, we felt that was a great commercial because they during the app they show you and they create nostalgia between showing the first wrestlers who were for everyone around the world who watch or used to watch wrestling back in the day. They know either for the movies, the people like Hulk Hogan or Stone Cold Steve Austin, and now that time has changes and females have more opportunities in that industry, having someone call them the man creates, especially coming from those old generations, that thing are like changing times in wrestling. So we feel this a great out because they create, as I mentioned, nostalgia and a good opportunity to showcase the new generations of that sport.
Okay. So you think that it shows an evolution in what wrestling was, which is definitely one of the things that we have seen in terms of all of the, what we might have called before blood sport, which were strictly male sports, right? I mean, it was only men that participated. You know, when I was a kid growing up, there was wrestling, which is not real. I mean, it's fake. I mean, there's real wrestling that they do in college, but it ends after that. And professional wrestling which is not real wrestling. It's about showmanship. That stupid camera is going. It's crazy. Hopefully it'll come back at some point in time. So if you're watching this, in the virtual world, just know that it's the directorial decisions of the artificial intelligence or something that's running the camera back there. That's not allowing you to see me. So it was an all male deal. Like there was two types of sort of sport in that arena when I was a kid growing up. There was boxing and wrestling was after college. It was fake, but yes, it was all male. Now mixed martial arts have come into it, the cage fighting, things like that. And it's not just men that participate, it's women that participate in those sports as well. And so you think that it's great because it highlights that transition, but makes a connection back to the past that is relatable and brings up nostalgia.
Correct. And also, as a fun fact, that was the first time that they included a female on that video game on the cover.
Right, okay, so that was a big part of the promotion of the sport in the past. And when I was a kid, I think they now call it, is it WWE?
Yeah.
World Wrestling Entertainment. It was WWF when I was a kid. And now they've got, what is it, WWE Raw?
WWE, because on 2001 they changed from federation to entertainment because they got a lawsuit from the world, the WWF, which is the animal protection.
Okay, World Wildlife Federation. Okay,
Yeah.
that's why they changed.
They changed from federation to entertainment.
Okay, so they got a problem with trademark infringement on the WWF. So it became WWE. I didn't know that. That's an interesting fact. What kinds of ethical implications do you think are presented by that ad? What did you, aside from it being a, unresponsive. You have to come back to that one. What ethical implications do you think that the ad presents? Why did you choose it from an ethical perspective? This is an ethics class, so that's important. Not just that the ad is entertaining or good, but also that the ad has some kind of ethical aspect to it. So what are the ethical aspects to that ad? None?
I would say it shows that women can do, women can do.
Okay, all right. That it promotes an expanded view of what people can do, what people are capable of. Since it wasn't your ad, you get a duck. If it's your ad, you don't get a duck. I hope you can answer the questions about your own ads. So I think that's, yeah, it's an evolution in what we have historically thought is appropriate for certain categories of people. And that I think is got ethical import. There are lots of controversies surrounding whether or not, those kinds of things should be appropriate if you have, a sort of traditional based strong father model of values, right? That could be a controversial topic, I guess. So that involves ethical issues in terms of things like that. I mean, what we generally have thought people are capable of doing and in the past has been radically different than what it is today in terms of ethics. In the past, it was when I was a kid growing up, for example, women could join the military, but the roles, they were never put in what were termed combat roles. Now, that is a gray area because once we got to World War One and after World War One, what became a combat area became much more difficult to define. Historically, battles were fought on a battlefield in which opposing armies lined up and faced off against each other. And then starting in World War One, that was no longer the case, right? They weren't going out and lining up on a battlefield and engaging in mortal combat. And so the arena of engagement has expanded. But still, when I was a kid, women were prohibited from, for example, flying fighter jets. They weren't put in those kinds of roles. If you were a pilot and a female in the Air Force, you flew heavies. And there weren't a lot of those. So I think that's an interesting development in terms of both cultural norms, which have an impact on what we view as being ethical in society. And to this day, we have remnants of it. I don't believe, the last time I checked, unless I'm incorrect on this, I don't believe that women have to register for selective service in this country. So, but men do, right? Everybody who's in here that's a US citizen had to register, for selective service. If you didn't register for selective service, you couldn't get things like student loans, right? So we are seeing an evolution in terms of the attitudes that the culture has towards these kinds of activities that I think is presenting, lots of things that we can think of in terms of ethical challenges, perhaps, depending on one's ethical paradigm. All right, so the real beauty, let's see if I can get it to play.
You might just go to the Like a Girl one if it works better.
Yeah, we put two of those up there because the one was having trouble with let's do the.
Let's see, that's Breaking Bad. We'll go to this one. So why did you choose this ad?
I feel like it kind of refers back to the last ad we watched, kind of putting women down, saying like they're not as strong as men, can't do things to the same ability as men. And it has been known as an insult. So I think it just kind of shows that that behavior is taught over time. You know, we think that we're just doing ourselves, being who we are. And here it comes as an insult. So we're trying to change that. And it did make a huge change. I wrote in the paper, 150 million people, I think, watched it or something, and they all now don't use the phrase like a girl or see it as an insult. So it did make like an impact during the time that it was released.
So when I was in law school, I think it was maybe, so they don't classify you in law school as freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, because it's only 3 years. They call you 1L, 2L, 3L. And if you're a 3L, you're obviously, in your last year of law school. So it's 90 hours. And when I started law school, women were slightly underrepresented in law school. And I think by the time I got to my 3L year was the year that it flipped. It may have been actually after my 3L year, but the number of applications of females compared to males certainly flipped. I don't remember. So they measured the statistic in two ways. A was number of applications of females versus males, and then B was the number of admissions of females versus males. And if you went back in time, so for example, when my mother was growing up, she wanted to go to law school. She wanted to be a lawyer. And the worst way, which is, I guess, why she told my brother and I that there were two professions, when we were growing up, that we could be. We could either be a doctor or a lawyer. And by doctor, she meant real doctor. That's what she would put it in air quotes. You can be a real doctor, which when I decided I was going to go get a PhD, the first time I was going to go get a PhD was before law school. And my mother said that she wouldn't pay for another worthless degree and that I could just give my car back to her and she would stop paying for my car insurance, that I was gonna go get like a law degree and I needed to go to law school. So I went to law school so I could keep my car and my insurance and all of the things that she was gonna pay for. So it was a big motivator for me to not have to, go into the real world. And so I went to law school and became a lawyer, but my mother wanted to go to law school in the worst way. I think she wanted to be a lawyer and I think she would have been a fantastic lawyer, but her own mother, when she said she wanted to go to law school, she said, well, you need to get a teaching degree so that you can always support yourself. So you can always fall back on yourself. And I remember when I was in undergraduate here at UCO taking a class that I had a professor who her entire career, she was a political science professor, and her entire career had been spent as a nursing major. And she took no nursing courses because when she went to OU and they said, you have to declare a major, what major do you want? And she said, I want to declare political science. And they said, no, honey, either men are political scientists. You can either do nursing or education, which of those? So she said, I'll do nursing. And she said, I knew, she just didn't fight them. She said, I knew that if I met all of the requirements for the degree program, that they couldn't deny me the degree. But so she went for 4 years to OU, being classified as a nursing major, never took one nursing course. And of course, she put together enough hours in political science to get a degree in political science. So these are not things that happen in other people's lives. I mean, these are people that you would have known. You could have known my mother. You could have known Sherry Carney, who was the professor that I had that told me this. And then when I first started teaching, I was in an office and I was across the hall from an economist named Jean Caldwell. And I said, Jean, how did you get a doctorate in economics? And she said, oh, I never intended to get a doctorate. I went to college to get the Mrs. degree. And she said, I found a husband and I didn't like him. So I went back to college. And by the time I found the second husband, I had a master's degree. And then I didn't like him, so I was having to teach school. And she said, then I decided I didn't like kids. So I figured I'd better go get a PhD so that I could teach adults because I didn't want to be stuck in high school teaching civics and social studies and high school economics. And so I think those are three examples of people that you could have known in your lifetime that, you know, had very limited views based on what their parents and society told them of what they could do in terms of being employed in certain professions. Now, I don't think anybody thinks a second thought. The number of women in law school outnumbers the number of men in law school by a fairly significant population. The number of women in college, I believe, outnumbers the number of men in college at this point. And so we've seen a huge transformation in the cultural landscape of what it was that we promoted in terms of what individuals could do based on, you know, being either female or male. And I think that's a huge transformation in society that I've seen again in my lifetime. Because when I said that I wanted to go to law school, which I started saying that as a child, and then I decided I didn't want to go to law school, and my mother decided that I was going to go to law school, it was largely still a male-dominated profession. And that was true up until the point at which, you know, it was still true up until the point at which I'd been practicing law, because although women started entering law school in greater numbers than men, there was still overwhelmingly the number of years that they had produced far more men law school graduates than women. You know, it was still a largely male-dominated profession. Now, I think if you look at the bench in Oklahoma in terms of judges, I think it's about even at least the district court level in terms of representation of men versus women. But when I was, you know, going to law school, it was overwhelmingly the district court in Oklahoma County was overwhelmingly male. So we've seen huge transformations in that, which I think is absolutely been a huge issue in terms of what we accept culturally and whether our cultural norms reflect ethical values or not in things like equal opportunity for individuals. Having said that, if we think about athletics though, I mean, we had the Oklahoma City Memorial Marathon. I mean, how often do women win the overall marathon? The fastest women runners are still slower than the top college athletes. Which, by the way, this is an interesting phenomenon as well. The Oklahoma City Marathon was this last weekend. The number of people participating in running has increased exponentially over the last 10 years. You want to know why? It's the only sport in the world where you can compete against the top athletes. Running is the only sport in the world in which everybody who runs can run against the top athletes in the world. If you play tennis, you can't enter the US Open. If you play basketball, you're probably not playing basketball after high school other than pickup games and stuff. You're certainly not gonna get an opportunity to go play in, the NBA against the Oklahoma City Thunder, except in maybe a promotional, community outreach kind of thing that they have. But running is the one sport that everyone can enter a sanctioned competitive event and compete against the top athletes in the world. And there are people who now want to do like these series of races that are the top races in the world, like the Boston Marathon, the New York City Marathon. And I think there's like 10 that people have on the list. It's become so popular that they now limit. I think even Oklahoma City's marathon is limited in terms of the number of people that they will let in. So you can qualify and are guaranteed a spot where you can put your name into the pool and be drawn. But they do limit the number of people that actually run in these marathons, which is unusual, but it's a highly egalitarian sport. Why is this one not? Let's try refreshing it. Which group chose this ad? This is an ad from my childhood. Why did you all choose this ad? Like I love that ad. It's one of my favorite ads.
I think we chose it because it's like a very classic ad. Everyone knows about it. Sorry, pretty much. So it's like very popular.
It is a classic ad. In fact, they played that ad until Tootsie Roll
Yeah.
still played that ad
I
up until I think like 10 years ago.
Hmm.
That was an ad that is like exceedingly memorable.
Hmm.
Do they still make Tootsie Roll, Tootsie Pops?
Mhm.
Do they really? I guess I haven't seen one in years. They used to have them like, on the counters of convenience stores and stuff like that. And I don't know, where can you buy them now? Where do you buy?
Just the grocery store. Yeah.
Um,
Grocery. I think they're.
Yeah.
They have a whole box at Sam's Club.
Yeah, I guess I thought you could buy an
Yeah.
entire box, but like I said, that used to be a popular thing. That was just sort of on the counter of lots of convenience stores that, you walk up and you have an impulse buy. People, but yeah, that's a classic ad. So what are the ethical implications of that ad?
I think it's marketed towards everyone, including children.
Okay.
So I think I don't know if that's really like an implication.
Now,
but-
the Californians would say it's a bad idea, right? Because it promotes, just like mentioning cake in a textbook on political science that has the layer cake and marble cake models, that might promote bad eating habits. And once again, this stupid thing is not working. Come on, over here, follow. It's not gonna work. So is it unethical to market towards children? I mean, it's clearly, Tootsie Rolls are, I can't remember the last time I had one. I just don't eat a lot of candy. But it's clearly marketed towards kids.
Mhm.
What we know a lot more. So when that ad came out, I think that ad was like 1970 something.
Ish, yeah.
And let's Google it and see when did the. $1969. How many licks, according to AI, I hope that it's not hallucinating that citation. We'll have to make sure that it's not hallucinating the citation, but that sounds about right, 1969. I was born in 1973, and I can remember the commercial, you know, as young as I was. So it's a classic. We know a lot more about brain development in terms of children now. And one of the things that we know is that your brain is not fully formed until you're 25 years old, approximately 25 years old. And at younger than that, you lack one of the things that is problematic from an advertising standpoint is that you lack impulse control. So is targeting ads to children ethical?
I guess maybe it would depend on the ad. Like, are you talking like that specific ad or?
Yeah,
just
do you
ads?
think do you think targeting, I mean, is there anything nutritious in a Tootsie Roll?
Not really.
No, it's pure sugar.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
In fact, it may even be some of the worst kinds of sugar because it's both crunchy, like the whole bite thing, that's horrible for your teeth. I mean, absolutely terrible. And then when you get to the Tootsie part of the thing, that may be even worse. So now you're running the risk of breaking your teeth, and then, you know, anything that's that sticky and gummy, it runs a risk of, you know, damaging your teeth by pulling it out. I mean, if you have, you know, loose fillings or anything like that, well, there goes that, right? So is there anything beneficial from, you know, I don't know. Of course, if we ate completely what was beneficial, it would be a really boring life, wouldn't it? I mean, it would be completely non-exciting to eat, you know, mostly vegetables with no salt or seasoning, raw. You know, with the diet, if we went back to all of these people who want to go back to what are the diet fads that we've seen that go back in time that argue that we should get back to our natural state? They've been gone by various names, like the paleo diet. Do any of you remember this diet craze? Where it was, everything was supposed to be like what, you know, ancient man would eat, which is what you could hunt and gather without a whole lot of additives to the food. So there is a lot of controversy, and a lot of countries don't allow you to market directly to children. McDonald's in other countries, so I had my McDonald's coffee this morning. McDonald's in other countries is not allowed to put, in some places, toys in their Happy Meals because they feel like that is impressing on a vulnerable population desires that they have a hard time overcoming and being influenced by that. So, all right, let's see, the Breaking Bad commercial.
think it might just,
You think what?
I think it might be a bunch of the commercials pulled up.
Together? So why did you choose that commercial?
I chose that commercial because I remember it. It was like a very memorable commercial, I feel like. At least for somebody who's watched Breaking Bad, I remember it playing during the Super Bowl and it like catching my eye. I think a lot of it has to do with nostalgia, kind of like everyone's saying. And like if you've watched Breaking Bad and you see the actors, it immediately catches your eye. It's also like it's funny if you know the context of it. So
So it's using an addictive theme and transferring that onto, I guess, an everyday product. And again, one of the things that we know from modern psychiatry and brain technology, you know, being able to analyze brain pattern activity in a highly scientific method, is that we have come to recognize that addiction is not necessarily just limited to a few things, that it can encompass a much wider variety of activities than we had thought about in the past. And if we went back even 15 to 20 years ago, the understanding of addiction was emerging to be more complex than what we understand it or what we understood it before, but it still was not really focused on an enormous set of variables that we can think of and now classify as addiction. So again, if you went back, 25 or 30 years ago, addiction recovery was limited pretty much to alcohol and drugs. And we now recognize that addiction can encompass more than just alcohol and drugs, and it can encompass food addictions as well as addictions to, and I think it's pretty obvious that a lot of us are addicted to this device. I mean, if you start having withdrawal, if you can't put the device down, and I can tell you that I am just as guilty as any one of you of constantly checking my phone, worrying about where it is. If I leave it at home, how many of you have done this? Like walked out the door, gotten, a block away, realized you didn't have your phone, and instantly went back, turned around, even if you were going to be late because your entire life is on this device. And we now have phantom vibrations when we think that the phone is going off and it's not. I can tell you that I have that perpetually. I constantly believe that the phone is going off. So I think your ad really brings up some huge ethical issues in that it uses humor in order to sell a product that, in fact, may be highly addictive. What makes food good? What makes us want it? It's usually all of the bad stuff. Salt, fat, acid, heat, right? Like they wrote a cookbook on these are the elements. Salt has enormous, and I'm sure that although it's baked, not fried, one of the things that happens when we say things like this in marketing, it's baked, not fried, we attach a health halo to the product. Baked Lays, for example, came out, and I'll tell you that, are they healthier than potato chips that are deep fat fried? Well, I guess maybe, except that one of the things that happens with me is that because I think they're healthier, I mean, I will not eat an entire large bag of potato chips by myself. I will limit it, but I will go through 2 bags. I can go through 2 or 3 bags of baked Lays. They're healthy. There's nothing healthy about a potato. In reality, I love, there is not a potato product that I don't absolutely crave. I am not a sweets person. I am a meat and potatoes kind of guy. If you said you have to choose between steak and baked potatoes and cake and ice cream, I will choose steak and baked potatoes over cake and ice cream every single day of the week. And I cannot stop once I have something like that. But my rational mind would say, with regard to old-fashioned potato chips that were fried in oil, well, they're greasy, and probably I shouldn't eat that. The other thing that we know happens with regard to products that are deep fat fried is the fat is actually what starts telling your brain, some signal to your brain that you're full. And those baked Lays have none of that. And so you end up eating a lot more. And there's research that suggests this, that people, if they attach a health halo effect to something, it's a healthy snack. You know, what could possibly be unhealthy about a baked, grain product? I don't know. Well, if you eat 3 bags of it, you're still consuming an astronomical amount of empty calories that are probably not great for you. Who came up with the Cheetos Puffs commercial? Which was that was you? All right. So why'd you choose that?
Well, it's a very nostalgic early 2000s. And just like it said, combines peanut butter and chocolate, which are 2 of the most, well, a lot of people like, and combine that together, along with, as it said, the visuals in the back, makes you really want to crave it and have a box right now. And then it's obviously targeted for children and teenagers, so they're gonna always want some.
Right. And we promote cereal and grains as being healthy. Again, is there probably anything healthy in a box of Reese's Puff cereal? No.
No, but it turns to chocolate, so that's good.
It
It
what?
turns the milk chocolate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's a
I
utility.
mean, and I don't know that we should be drinking milk either. It's one of those things that, again, I love it. I love absolutely 100% cow's milk. And I don't understand these other products that people say like soy. That's not milk. That's some communist plot to destroy the fabric of America. So I think, it's a cute commercial. It does make you want to go out and buy Reese's Puffs. Again, is it something that we should be promoting? I don't know. And again, to the targeted population, that raises a lot of questions. So this one, I remember this ad. Who chose the Betty White? That is another great ad. There's one that I remember. This one was a Snickers commercial. That was really cool. You all are too young to remember that. That was the Al Gore versus George W. Bush election year. And I thought it was just absolutely, I thought it was one of the funniest commercials I'd ever seen in my entire life. And it made me want a Snickers. Snickers is scientifically one of the most scientifically best produced foods out there in terms of satisfying all kinds of, like the caramel gets all of the nuts and grabs it. And I mean, it's like literally the science behind Snickers. I don't know if they intended it, but I read this whole article on why Snickers is like stuck around and other candy bars have left. It has everything. It's salty and sweet, and it's got just this amazing amount of ability to, in your mouth, provide just the right amount of chew and crunch, and then be able to swallow it easily. It's an incredible food. But again, not good for you, right? It's definitely one of those things that, yeah, I mean, we can't eat everything that's completely healthy, but if you're eating a lot of Snickers, and that's the two sweets that I do like if I'm gonna eat something, are Snickers or Reese's peanut butter cups. Those are the two best, I think, overall candies that you can get. So we're gonna combine marketing theory with ethical theory and talk about whether or not ads are ethical for just a minute. And then I'm gonna give you your final critical thinking challenge, which you'll have Thursday to work on in your groups, which is to develop an ad using AI and focus on whether or not the ad that it develops is an ethical ad. And they can develop ads really, really quickly now. So I'm going to distill down what I think creates a great ad from a marketing theory perspective into two components. And having taught advertising for a long time, I've come to think that you can distill all of IMC down to two things. Does the ad engage the mind of the consumer? So that's the first element. Does it engage the mind of the consumer? And I played an ad for you earlier in the semester called the Herding Cats commercial, which was a Super Bowl commercial for EDS. And that ad clearly engages the mind of the consumer. Why? Because the American cowboy is an iconic image in the American cultural landscape. It's something that has been written about, done in all kinds of artistic endeavors, from art, paintings, sculpture, to movies and plays and books. It's one of the most popular genres, even to this day, even in an age in which I have started asking students, a continuation of a question that I asked when I started teaching, which is, how many of you grew up on a farm? And when I started teaching here at UCO many, many years ago, overwhelmingly, the majority of the students in my classes would say they either grew up on a farm, or coming from this area in Oklahoma, or their grandparents owned a farm. And when I ask that question now, overwhelmingly, most students have no one that they know that's been involved in farming at some point in their life, which I think is just kind of, an interesting sociological phenomenon, in that we've really gotten away from that idea of family farming, and nobody knows anybody who's a farmer anymore. But that wasn't the case even very recently. But in spite of the fact that we've seen this move away from students having some familiarity with farming and ranching and the country lifestyle, it still remains an enormously attractive genre, as is evidenced by the popularity of all of the Taylor Sheridan shows like Yellowstone. And he's released a new one called The Madison, which is a beautifully filmed and well-written, sort of epic about the American West. No, it doesn't involve horses, but it involves a ranch and fly fishing and all of those things that we think of as being sort of stereotypical of the Western outdoor lifestyle. And so the EDS ad with the herding cats really engages the mind of the consumer, because you have this huge iconic image that we have of the American cowboy, and then you juxtapose it with this animal that we don't think of as being part of that heritage, which is these cats that are running, and they're saving the cats from the water and herding them across this river and bringing them in to the corrals. And it's enormously, in terms of the story that it tells, very appealing, right? And entertaining and funny. But it failed on the second part, or the second prong, which is engage the mind of the consumer, deliver a selling message. I think the ad failed in that. Nobody could remember what the ad was for, or the company. So the ads that you chose, I think a lot of them were the Tootsie Roll ad, for example, is an iconic one that it engages the mind of the consumer. Here's this kid that wants to know how many licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll, Tootsie Pop, and he's gonna ask animals, which why would we ask animals? But, I guess it's because we have these ideas of these animals. And so we have, the clever fox, the wise owl, the elderly turtle, who I guess age is supposed to also impart some kind of wisdom. And then it gets, like the owl just is like 1, 2, 3, click, and then bites it, and it takes exactly 3 licks to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll, Tootsie Pop. And it delivers a selling message because you see the animals eating, or the last animal eating the product, right? So it clearly delivers a selling message. And when you combine these two elements, engage the mind of the consumer, deliver a selling message, you can use advertising and persuasion in ways that have enormous ethical implications. And what are those enormous ethical implications? Well, as we discussed with some of these, with regard to things like whether or not the ad is playing on a vulnerable population like children who lack impulse control necessary to make good judgments about what they should be eating. We talk about, in terms of ethics, whether or not we are impacting individuals in a way such that they lack autonomy, right? So what is autonomy? And your text suggests or intimates that autonomy is not something that you have 1 minute and not the next. And I disagree with that, because I think that you can have autonomy in one situation in your life, and if you're facing another critical situation in your life, you may not have autonomy. So for example, if you're a business executive and you know what it is that you're doing at work, but you get told that you have cancer, you may not make the best decisions in terms of that aspect of your life. So how is it that we can help people and inform them to make the best decisions? And why is advertising somewhat ethically problematic? Well, because in many instances, what can happen when we see these ads is, and if we lack impulse control, because we're in a vulnerable population like children, or somebody who is emotionally invested in something that is risky, like their health in terms of cancer decisions, well, the will can become overborne. And what do we mean by the will is overborne? Well, at the point that you overbear the will, you are influencing somebody's ability to think rationally and think autonomously for themselves. So what is it that constitutes a voluntary choice, a voluntary selection. Well, I think if we turn to the law talks about this in criminal law and procedure, and they come up with a really good formula in a case called Florida versus Bostic, the United States Supreme Court, and I think they applied the test wrong in that case, but they come up with what I think is an interesting test for us to think about as marketers in terms of whether or not we are influencing people in an unethical way. So in Florida versus Bostic, the court says that what we have to focus on is whether or not, again, somebody is free to make a choice that is independent and autonomous. And what they focus on is, one, that the choice is knowing, two, voluntary, and three, intelligent. 3 prongs to the test. Now, knowing is very easy. Are you awake? Are you aware of your surroundings? Right? Most people are. Unless you're suffering from amnesia or something like that, you know whether or not you're engaged in thinking about the activity, right? That's a pretty low bar to satisfy. The second is voluntary. This becomes more difficult. And Florida versus Bostic highlights this. This case focuses on police officers who get on buses in the state of Florida with SWAT-like gear and all of the indicia of sort of a paramilitary kind of activity. So they get on these buses in Florida, and the case is rather old because nobody travels by bus, or very few people travel by bus anymore. They get on buses and they approach people and they ask them, can I go through your luggage? Because a lot of drugs come into the country from people, bringing them into ports in Florida, then transporting them using individuals by giving them to put it in their luggage and then, transport it out. At the time, this is the way they did it. There's much more sophistication, distribution networks in these kinds of things now today, but they were giving these people, paying them to take stuff in their luggage. So the police get on board the bus. They are holding shotguns or their pistols, and they approach people who are sitting down in a seat on the bus and say, can I search your luggage? And the court says, everybody knows a question is a question. And these people should know. It's voluntary, completely voluntary. The prisons are full of people today who don't know that you can tell the police no. Right? Kathleen Madigan does this whole spiel and one of her things about how she was very conflicted as a child because her father said, Kathleen, when the police are talking to you, don't you ever say anything other than I want my lawyer. And she said, and then I went to Catholic school and, I was told we need to confess to the priest. And she's thinking like, I'm not telling you anything. My father told me, if somebody says, what did you do? You shut up and say, I want my lawyer. Most people don't know. And the court says in this case, people know when a question's a question. I used to, when I was associate general counsel, I was very busy. And so I used to take roll and attendance in my classes. And every day I'd get the roll and I'd go into my administrative assistant's office and I would say, Brandy, can you enter this into the attendance roster? And she'd say, yes, Dr. Grantley, of course I'll do that. She couldn't pronounce my last name, so she called me Dr. Grantley. Even though I was like, you can just call me Grant. I don't care. But she'd say yes. And, was that, I asked, it was a question, can you do this for me? Was it really a question? It wasn't a question, right? Because if she had said no, she could get up and get the hell out, right? I mean, we ask things as questions all the time that are not questions. But the court says no, like this is voluntary. A man with a badge and a gun is standing over you and says, now as marketers, we don't have the luxury of having a badge and a gun. But the power of persuasion in some of these ads can be just as detrimental. And it may not be voluntary. The third part is whether or not it's intelligent. What constitutes an intelligent choice? Now, this one gets really difficult. Knowing are you conscious? Are you awake? Do you have Alzheimer's? When you signed the will, did you lack mental capacity? Like for most of us, this is not hard. If you have Alzheimer's and you're in, and the nurse comes in and says, I want you to sign everything over to me, you don't know what you're doing at that point, right? You may be conscious, but but that's, for most of us, that's not a hard bar. The voluntary and intelligent. When does the desire that we create as marketers become so overwhelming, the powers of persuasion? And we can do this in not just advertising, but in professional sales roles in terms of promotion. We teach you how to find somebody's pain point and then focus on solutions for that pain point. So is it voluntary? Is it intelligent? What is intelligent? Well, intelligence this is the hardest one. Is it an intelligent choice? Right? Well, in order to be an intelligent choice, you have to have access to all the facts. Now, most of the commercials that you all came up with, we all know what the facts are. I think we all know, with regard to the Breaking Bad commercial, for example, that was selling baked, and is it popcorn? Is it baked popcorn chips? Is that what it is that they're selling? I think we all know that that's probably not. It's maybe better for us than a fried potato chip, but not by much in reality, right? I think we all sort of know that. When we get to things like drugs, it becomes harder. Should we all be on GLP-1s? They're advertising these, they seem like miracle drugs. What do you need to know if you're talking about a drug other than it can help you lose weight, lower your A1C? Oh, yeah. And they list some of them. The major side effects include, it's mostly gastrointestinal. Well, that sounds, like not too bad. Oh, I'm going to get a little upset tummy. No, people have extreme distress over some of these things. So I want you to develop an ad. There's a prompt in there that says for Love's Corporation, and then focus on whether or not the AI develops an ad that is one that engages the mind of the consumer, delivers a selling message, and then analyze whether or not that ad has the potential to violate the knowing, voluntary, and intelligent propositions of the test for whether or not it's an ethical ad. All right? Should be a fun project. AI can develop all kinds of stuff really quickly anymore. So with that, you have Thursday to work on that, and it's due, I think I said the following Friday. I gave you until Friday, since that's also finals week and there's stuff that probably have to do.
Question,
Hold
are
on
we,
1 second, let me end the stream. Go ahead, yeah.